Hi, I'm Dr. Nathalie Edmond, coming to you again to talk about internalized racism today. I hope that you've checked out some of my other videos, white supremacy and privilege, the untold story of racism, the RAIN meditation, as well as what particularly white people can do to engage in dialogues about racism. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about internalized racism because I really believe that all of us are impacted by white supremacy. So white supremacy is the system in which we live that creates white privilege. And a person of color can be just as conditioned by these things, right? And so I'm just going to share a little bit of my own personal experience of internalized racism that I have tried to work with my entire life, right? Just to give you a little bit of background, both of my parents were born and raised in Haiti, and my mother came to the United States around age 15, and my father came to the United States around age 21. And they kind of were that American dream story, right? That they came to this country knowing very little English, and they put themselves through school, and they became professionals, a nurse, a pharmacist, moved to the SERPs, from a person of color inner city to a predominantly white suburb when they had young kids. And so I think about a lot of the messages that they taught me over the years, right, to survive, right? And there are a lot of multiple truths in those stories. So stories around not spending a lot of time with African Americans because they did not themselves identify as African Americans because of being of Haitian descent. That they had internalized the stories of this country, of all the negative stereotypes about African Americans. And yet, on the same level, they understood the deep nature of racism, and they themselves experienced the racism. Sometimes it was a little different because they had an accent. And I can remember being a kid, and from a very early age, right, I had this kinky hair, this afro, and my mom would put my hair in these braids and pigtails and things like that. And I couldn't wait until the day that I could straighten my hair. The day I could straighten my hair. And I think it was around maybe age 12 that I was allowed to do that. And I was so excited, right? I had no idea that was related to white supremacy, right? That I had internalized these images because what did I see on TV and magazines and dolls, right? I saw whiteness. And whiteness was associated with good. It was associated with beauty. And I so wanted to be all those things. And I remember little messages my parents would give me, right, about ways I needed to appear professional, ways that I needed to carry myself, who I needed to associate with, how I needed to speak, how I had to try, twice as hard as my white counterparts because the system was not meant for me to succeed. And I remember being in my early 30s and deciding that I didn't want to perm my hair anymore. I didn't want to relax it anymore. And so it was a big deal. I had to think about it. So I, got braids and kind of, I don't know if you know how much you know about black hair, but it takes a while for the perm to kind of grow out. So I did that by having braids for a while, and then I moved, and so I have had locks, dreadlocks, since my first child was born. So he's turning 13 in September, so I've had it for 13 years. And it was such a process for me to shed some of my internalized racism, right? Because so many of media portrayals at that time, locks weren't cool and popular. Natural hair was not a thing to be proud of per se. And so with each stage of my hair process, right, I saw myself working through the beliefs that I had built within myself around hair and what it should look like and how pretty and attractive it was. And my locks grew really long, and I was like, oh, I finally achieved long hair, because again, I associated that with whiteness. And then I remember when I wanted to do like the big chop, I was tired of the long hair. I had to really process it, right? And so I ended up cutting my hair. It's grown back some. But I just noticed all the ways in which, if you are not surrounded by models that affirm you, what else could you possibly think about yourself, right? And so other ways I think that we can internalize racism, right, is that if we become, as people of color, right, as we become better educated, as we achieve certain privileges and statuses, as privilege does, it protects us in some ways. It gives us access in some ways, and we can forget the systemic racism that exists, right? Because we're a little bit more protected by it, right? So I've mentioned in other videos, right? I'm protected in some ways that as a psychologist, I don't have to be on the front lines during the COVID crisis. I can do telehealth. I can do online counseling from the comfort of my home or comfort of my office with little risk to exposure to COVID. Right? That I remember like the decision of where should I move so that my kids can get the best education, right? And yet, oftentimes that comes at a cost, because it means moving to a predominantly white area, right? And then what are the negative psychological consequences for kids of color being in predominantly white spaces, right? They can't fully relax because they have to be on guard. And I see that in my soon-to-be 13-year-old, right? That he moved from predominantly person of color space to predominantly white space, and he feels it. It's palpable to him, the differences, the ways in which white kids just don't get it, because they don't have to get it. They don't have to think about race. And they're so often surrounded by people who look like them, which is affirming, right? So just thinking about how the culture, right, has a way of affirming some people and not affirming other people, right? And how do we do our own inner work, right, to start to challenge some of the biases that we've been taught, right? To challenge some of the assumptions, to really take our own look before we point the finger at other people, to check inside what's coming up for me, what's going on for me, where does this message come from? Right? And so there's so much racism that's so subtle, and we really need to slow down in order to be able to start to really see that, right? And I, in the last few decades in which I have really embraced being unapologetically Black, it has enriched my life tremendously. And I am saddened for all the years in which I did not see Blackness as beautiful, because that's what society told me in so many different ways. I am so excited by all the shows and programming and magazines that affirm Black and brown bodies. So I hope that you will continue to dive into more of these topics. And I welcome your comments, and I hope that you will just join me for ongoing discussions about how to become an anti-racist. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace.